What the hell is long COVID? Chapter 3. COVID and me. This is, unfortunately, all too concretely, my story. I wish this book were just a discussion of COVID in the abstract, going on and on about statistics, studies, and the struggles of other people. But here's where I hope you can benefit. You can learn by hearing what happened to me before you let COVID work any further on you. A year ago, if someone had said, "Hey, you need to detox after you get COVID," I would have said, "Yeah, thanks. Meh." If you're still thinking along those lines, hold your horses. Because once you finally come to understand how this bioweapon was designed to work, you might rethink your meh. I've certainly had ample time to reconsider mine, trust me. COVID has all but destroyed me. I'm fairly certain I've heard a scythe-toting skeleton knocking at my door at certain points. As I write, I'm still battling this thing. I'd love to wait until all is said and done until I publish this, but I'm writing this now because here, time is of the essence. This is the book I wish I had a year ago. What convicts me to write this book is the realization that I finally understand, at least in a meaningful biomechanical sense, what's going on. It's still a long haul from here, but at least I know what road I'm traveling. By telling you my story and what I've discovered, you can transpose that to you and heal. So, without further ado, there I was, a wee lad of 5, with a pot belly protruding out several inches in front of me wherever I ran. Wait a minute, what? COVID wasn't even around back then. That's correct. But as you'll soon see, this is lesson number 1 about how COVID works. COVID doesn't necessarily cause X condition, sore throat, fever, etc. There's a reason COVID has 1,001 symptoms, because those symptoms aren't all COVID symptoms. They're secondarily caused by COVID. What's the difference? Read on, my friend. So there I was, 5-year-old with a pot belly. Turns out that pot belly was inflammation caused by gluten sensitivity. I remember when I was maybe about 10 years old, I was sick of my pot belly. I couldn't shake it, no matter how hard I tried, and occasionally I'd get embarrassed about it. Whatever. I remember praying to Our Lady, asking her to get rid of my belly. Little did I know she would absolutely answer my prayer. 20 years later. I firmly believe that, however devastating the past year has been for me, it has been the answer to my prayers. God was using my weakness to tee me up so that I could ultimately help others. The moral of that story is to be careful what you pray for. Anyways, I want to start with my story because I realize in hindsight that I am perhaps the archetypical, healthy, so to speak, target for COVID. My pre-existing weaknesses are the exact weaknesses that COVID exploits. Once you understand my health weak spots and what COVID did to me, you'll be able to understand how this bioweapon works in you a bit better. In short, COVID has 2 primary attack routes: spike inflammation and autoimmune attack. In my case, both are involved. A quick footnote, just to be clear. COVID has dozens of different attack routes, but I'm simplifying here. What's discussed here are the root mechanisms that then permute into dozens of other effects. If you block these 2 attacks, you'll essentially block everything that will follow later. Anyways, let's start with a short overview of gluten sensitivity. Modern gluten consumption is incredibly unnatural and unprecedented. Never before in food history have humans eaten herbicide-drenched, unfermented, starch-concentrated, nutritionally stripped, genetically modified gluten year-round, with no seasonal break whatsoever. Gee, I wonder what could be causing these gluten sensitivity problems. No idea. Anyways, as we moderns eat it, obviously gluten is incredibly inflammatory to anyone. However, in some people, it's highly inflammatory. We say that these people are gluten sensitive. These people may have a gut that essentially has gone on strike to some extent, creating some kind of inflammation or low-level amount of autoantibodies, antibodies created by their own immune system that attack their gut and cause inflammation whenever gluten is eaten. But the next level up of this sensitivity we call celiac disease, i.e. people who generate a significant amount of autoantibodies whenever they eat gluten, causing nasty volcanic destruction whenever they eat it. The former, gluten-sensitive, can, should they so choose, routinely cheat and brave the upset tummy caused by eating gluten. The latter, celiacs, cheat at their own peril. For many of us, it means several days of head-spinning, stomach-churning devastation, not to mention weeks or even months of heavy collateral damage that follow with other organs, spleen, pancreas, gallbladder, etc. Not good. Well, prior to 2021, apparently, I was the former, gluten-sensitive. I probably had some autoantibodies, and gluten certainly caused enough inflammation in my gut where I couldn't shake my spare tire no matter how hard I tried. But I could still hog down on the kolachkis at Grandma's and eat my gluten with impunity. I mean, really, how hard is that choice? Spare tire gut or pizza? Hello. Obviously pizza, am I right? In case you can't tell, my love language is pizza. Because inflammation isn't that bad, right? After all, everyone has inflammation. But think about what inflammation is. Inflammation is just the body's response to something gone wrong. When the old man went to bed and bumped his head, he'll have a subsequent bump because his body is responding to the whack that happened. It's gathering fluids, cleaning up injured tissue, and preventing infection from spreading by gumming up blood flow to that area. No one is walking around saying, "Owie, I have a bad case of inflammation." No, inflammation is a secondary symptom, a response to an enemy injury in your body caused by something else, and if left unchecked, then causes further problems. Inflammation is what one could call a secondary symptom. But if that injury or irritation doesn't subside and is not healed, neither does that inflammation. As time goes on, inflammation pushes, oh so silently, hence sometimes being labeled the silent killer. Eventually something snaps, twang, like a bowstring. This, my friends, on a both macro-inflammation and a micro-inflammation scale, is COVID's attack strategy. As I, staring at the ceiling one night blacking out, was about to find out the very, very, very hard way. At this juncture, I'd love to proffer an excuse and save face, say I had no idea, blah, blah, blah. I was about as smart as my 2-year-old when he dashes into the bathroom to try and get a cool, refreshing swig of toilet water. My kids are smart, I promise. You see, I knew COVID was a bioweapon. I had known from the beginning, talking to friends and family members in the scientific and medical field. I knew that the point of eugenics campaign is to wipe a significant slice of humanity off the map, like you do when you're losing at the game Risk. I even had my dad, the doctor, suggesting to me that this was all COVID. Even more embarrassing, I remember calling up one of my friends who had COVID and lamenting that I couldn't just share popsicles and get it over with and get some natural immunity. Pro tip, don't share popsicles with bioweapon virus sicknesses unless you know what you're doing. 6 wretched months later, I can attest I did not know what I was doing. So there I was, November 2020. I got COVID. Meh, no big deal sore throat toy fever, right? Well, this is unrelated, but 8 days later I got a hernia. Obviously it's unrelated, right? I mean, how on earth would the flu cause a hernia? Don't be a moonstruck lunatic. Things got slowly worse from there until December 2021, 13 months later. I had no idea what was going on. This would be the summer that I decided to restock my suits and buy several pairs of pants, which, after plummeting 55 pounds in a span of a month and a half, looked like they could fit 2 of me. Anyways, the point is that my COVID-related inflammation blew me up like a balloon, and here I thought I was just getting sloppy with my diet. Not quite. Let's move back from December 2021. In August 2021, all unrelated of course, about a week or 2 after coming down with an unidentified sickness right after coworkers had tested positive for COVID Delta. Anyways, I was brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed. Suddenly I wasn't. The world was spinning and I was lying on the ground struggling to maintain consciousness. We were able to get to the ER, and, surprise, not really if you've had long COVID, you know what's coming, you're used to this by now. The ER doc says, yeah, probably just an anxiety attack, take an aspirin and a drink of water, thanks for the visit. It wouldn't have been so frustrating, however, if that was the end. But it wasn't. I started to get worse from there, noticeably now. Ever since my collapse, I had a burning in my stomach right in the center. What the heck was that? After much guessing, possible diagnoses, etc., I finally got in to see the GI specialist who ran a blood test on me. I got a call shortly thereafter and was told, hey, your gluten autoantibody markers are high, but keep eating gluten in the meantime, until we can do an upper endoscopy. Here comes more embarrassment. I thought, well, I know about this. My dairy sensitivity was triggered back in college. This is obviously basically the same thing except gluten. Why on earth is it happening now? Who knows? But of course, I can still have gluten, right? Just keep it minimal. Wrong. So wrong. I sent my results to my dad and father-in-law, both solid doctors, and received 2 calls, both saying the same thing. Hey, your gluten results weren't just high. They were literally off the charts. Just for context, a TTGIGA test, the gluten blood test marker, that comes back positive, at levels 1 through 4 means likely gluten sensitive. Levels 4 through 15 means likely celiac. My levels came back at 250 plus, literally as high as this particular lab could measure. Footnote, several months later, enough for the levels to have halved, I tested at a different lab, and the results came back at just under 450. What the heck was going on? How on earth did I go from a bowl of pasta gives me a spare tire to a single molecule of gluten literally makes me black out? Because that's exactly what happened. As I found out, sensitivity and autoimmunity are very different. Sensitivity basically means it irritates your gut somewhat, somehow, while autoimmunity means that even a single molecule sets off a chain reaction that can absolutely crush you. Footnote, everyone is different, but for me it would happen about 20 minutes after I'd get glutened. I'd start to feel certain stomach pains, mega bloating, headache, lightheaded, then sink into complete anemic weakness, unable to move and pulse in and out of consciousness. For about 3 to 5 days after that, I'd be absolutely wrecked, minimally functional. This would happen if I ate any amount of gluten, even things you'd normally think of as gluten-free, cross-contaminated spices, lentils, strawberries, even certain items labeled gluten-free. Processed on the same lines as gluten, wham. Okay, I was about to learn front and center just about everything there is to know about autoimmunity, which isn't that much, unfortunately. Our understanding of autoimmunity is quite limited. The only recourse that you're provided from mainstream health authorities is, well, live with it. Hope it doesn't kill you too quickly. But I was managing it. I was eating gluten-free. There was a learning curve, but I was stabilizing until, now this is sheer coincidence, of course, nothing to do with anything COVID. Our household got Omicron COVID in November 2021, and about a week later after eating supper, I went outside to feed the animals. On my way back into the house, I felt something deep in my stomach give, the nastiest feeling in the world, like your center of gravity just got toyed with. Wrenching. The world started spinning. I started blacking out, lying there, unable to move, speak, or think. I went to bed, and from then on, something was just different. As it turns out, that give was a second hernia. And oh, so much more. Curveball. Buckle up. Because now to me, everything was like gluten. It seemed no matter what I'd eat, it would hammer me like gluten. Eventually, by process of elimination, I was eating only meat, fish, and fats. Quick footnote here. Don't ever let anyone tell you that meat is inflammatory. Nonsense. Yes, maybe nasty processed meat with a bunch of toxic junk injected into it, but not meat qua meat. Not grass-fed sunshine meat raised in the wild, eaten from all parts of the animal. You're made of meat. If meat qua meat were inflammatory, you'd be dead. You're made of saturated fats, meat proteins, etc. Go ahead and look at any study where they conclude meat is inflammatory. I have, and you'll notice if you actually read it, there is always something else involved adjacent to meat, i.e. eating a burger with a gluten bun, etc., or toxin-drenched factory farm meat. Did you know ammonia and chlorine are the most common meat preservatives? You simply won't find a study that can demonstrate that grass-fed, sunshine-raised wild meat and meat fats eaten from all parts of the animal is inflammatory, because it simply isn't. Again, you'd be dead because your meat and your fats are saturated fats. It may not be what everyone needs at all times, nutritionally, but it's simply not inflammatory. Personally, I can tell when I've eaten too many veggies. Yes, organic, usually from local farms or gardens. Plants have a defense mechanism. They want you to remember how tough it was to eat them and avoid them next time. Research anti-nutrients. Sure, says the veggie-only eater, but you can compensate for anti-nutrients, and meat lacks vitamin C, etc. The proper veggie diet has comparable nutrients to meat. Sure, says the meat diet person, but it's not a 1-to-1 ratio because the plant nutrient bioavailability is next to nothing, and plant diets are deficient even more. And sure, says the veggie-only eater, etc. The back and forth. Here's the deal. You do what works best for you nutritionally. But in my opinionated opinion, I have yet to even read about, let alone encounter, a grass-fed meat and fat-heavy Weston A. Price type diet person who got an autoimmune disease, switched to plant-based, no meat, and healed. I have read of plenty of people who ate utter crap, switched to a plant-based diet, then healed. But to me, it seems like that's mainly because they stopped killing themselves, not because plants are soothing to the gut. In my experience, plants are super tough on the gut, which can sometimes be a good thing if you're completely healthy. I'm battling back an apparent ulcer. Plants hurt it. Meat, including fatty meats, help it like crazy, despite what you read online. Don't get me wrong, I love my plants. There is no way I'm staying away from plants. I'm a big believer in eating both. God gave us different kinds of teeth. That should signify something. But each in its proper nutritional context. Plants simply are tough on the gut. I'd love to see a study comparing the rates of autoimmune disease and leaky gut in plant-based diets versus a Weston A. Price type diet. Again, though, any variation of plant-based diet seems better than the American supermarket factory farm diet. Well, there it is. Just my opinionated 2 cents. Back to my November 2021 post-COVID, where everything felt like gluten. Maybe I can handle a little bit of popcorn, I thought. 1 hour later, crushed, literally blacking out, bumping into walls, talking gibberish as I reeled like a drunken sailor through the house, blathering incoherently, my wife forcing me to lie down. As if to demonstrate my lack of intelligence a few days later, I said to myself, well, half a spoonful of almond butter wouldn't hurt, right? You guessed it. 1 hour later, crushed. Not as bad as the popcorn, but out of commission for a few days. I tested my hard-taught theory with a tiny sip of tomato juice, half a spoonful, a classic autoimmune trigger, and sure enough, wham! Okay, so this is clearly something autoimmune. Inflammation is somehow eventually causing an autoimmune reaction in my gut, just like gluten had done starting back in August. Ah yes, celiac. Being merely gluten-free seemed so lovely from here. Quick footnote for those interested, I'll get on how to address this in a later chapter, but for the interested, I was basically doing a tighter version of the AIP diet. If you've never done it, you should do the AIP diet, even if you don't think that you have health problems of any sort. It's easy, it's meant to be temporary, and it's whacked how amazing it is. If you actually commit to it and do it, you will almost certainly see results in about 2 to 3 days. It's shocking. Do it. I talked to the doctors and specialists about this, and still no one had any idea what on earth was all happening. Sometimes it felt like kidney issues, dark brown urine, etc. Gross. I'd zero in on kidney issues, and then voila, a few days later they'd be fine, acting like nothing ever happened. Headaches and nausea, reckless brain fog, gallbladder and pancreas pain, small intestine, colon pain, constipation, diarrhea, you name it. If there's a symptom, I had it. And the fatigue. Not fatigue like, oh, I'm tired. Fatigue like someone just drained every drop of blood out of my veins and saddled me up with a tractor tire on my back, and I can't do more than whisper, let alone move. Fatigue. I was absolutely wrecked. Every morning, my worst nightmare was the fact that I was starting another day. Every evening, I'd dread the fact that I had to go through yet another night. Quick footnote. I talked to one gentleman who had had 11 years of Lyme's disease and 1 year of long COVID. He told me that he'd rather go through 11 more years of Lyme disease than another year of long COVID. Somehow, I had gone from pretty decently healthy to having routine multiple organ malfunction, pain, nausea everywhere all the time, debilitating symptom after debilitating symptom, and some kind of chimeric autoimmunity. Looking back at so many points and in so many ways, I believe that but for the mercy of God, I could easily have simply lost the battle and become another fatality of this monster. But the worst part, all along my tests kept coming back normal, giving me the middle finger, test results normal, mocking me. Again, if you're reading this having had long COVID, you know what I mean. Yep. You get a little panicky when it comes to your health, I see. Yep. Functional illness. Are you sure you're not just making this up? Blood test, urine test, fecal test, X-ray, MRI, CT, sonogram, heart test, all coming back A-OK. Get this man in for some hypochondriac counseling. Now, I said the doctors had no idea what was going on. Well, sort of. Here again, my shining embarrassment is on display. Sometime in November 2021, before things really hit the fan, my dad, and again doctor and sort of a COVID expert, no less, began to ask me, "Are you sure this isn't long COVID?" Obviously this wasn't COVID related. Look, COVID's basically a wimpy flu, right? In sheer desperation, I began to consider my dad's theory. I went back and looked at the timeline. Suddenly I noticed something odd. Every time I had a crazy health incident that chewed me up and spit me back out, it was approximately a week after my COVID infection. Hernia number 1 was 8 days after COVID alpha. My blackout celiac incident was 8 days after COVID delta. My hernia number 2 and crazy autoimmune was 8 days after COVID Omicron. Quick footnote, I don't cover acute COVID much in this book, but the reader well-versed in acute COVID should be familiar with this. COVID initially infects you, then begins the viral replication phase. As the virus replicates, your immune system charges in and starts to kill it, which then precipitates viral debris inflammation, just like a runny nose, essentially dead virus parts. About 5 days or so in, the dead viral pieces will begin to flush around your system and generate symptoms, so when people say, "I got COVID on day X," what they really mean is that they became symptomatic on day X. They technically got infected about 5 days earlier than X and only felt it on day X. About 8 days after symptoms start, the actual viral die-off peaks, thereby triggering a massive flush of spike in inflammation. COVID's dreaded 8th day inflammation is well known for this reason. You think you're okay, then suddenly wham, the die-off really gets going and you get hit. What you're getting hit with is viral dead bodies, but more clandestinely and more to the point, spike poisoning and autoimmune-induced inflammation, which we'll get to shortly. Okay. Here we are. As I write this book, nearly a year and a half after this all started, my head feels like it's going to explode. My back is ripping from wayward adrenal glands, and my stomach feels like I just drained the cup of bitter dregs and found a dead mouse at the bottom. How on earth could COVID cause something like this? Why did it hit me, and not others like this? Or did it hit others? Is it hitting others? And they just don't know it because they don't have my particular weaknesses. I had to dive in and reverse engineer this thing if I wanted to survive it. I know plenty of people with health problems, but somehow my personal weaknesses were particularly sensitive to COVID's attack. COVID took my lifelong spare tire, my gluten and dairy sensitivity, my inflammation, and somehow detonated them into something ghoulish. Why those specifically? And how did it take me a full year to start really feeling these attacks? I was about to learn the lesson that I hope you'll have learned by the end of this book. Kids, don't mess around with bioweapons.